the same mistake this time. We are the children.
The lack of infrastructure that actually exists for teachers to take a break or a sabbatical. And especially as we see so many teachers leaving the classroom for good, I'm thinking a lot about how a break can be an alternative to an exit. Also being out of the classroom, I'm still working full time and I'm still working with young people, but in a college setting and not as a classroom teacher. And it's almost difficult to express how profoundly different it is, especially on Sunday evenings. And it's really brought into focus for me that teaching should not feel as hard and stressful as it does. And I don't really think people who aren't teachers fully understand the intensity. And I think the conditions that make this work so hard are systemic, and they're based on a set of choices, and that those choices can be changed. Like another way is possible. And I think we need to fight for it to be different. And we need to build strong coalitions in order for it to be different, because there's still nothing like the beauty and the possibility and the magic of the classroom. And this break is what's allowing me to return to that.
Yeah, I appreciate, so much what I'm hearing there, Natalia, is it's not just about like your individual resolve or like looking in the mirror and saying, let's go, or needing a mindfulness break, that there's really, there's structural connections. And that, when we have our teacher organizer meetings, that what you just said, that the Sunday evening, right, how you're feeling there as a measure of, what you're going to bring into the classroom really matters. So, when we put this panel together, we talked a lot about, and the teachers talked a lot about this language of crisis, this national narrative about schools being in crisis.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, public schools, there's truth to that, as we're going to explore, right? There's schools right in Connecticut and New Haven where, we're talking about missing math teachers and science teachers and teachers working double shifts, students seeing beloved teachers go. But on the other hand, a fear that if we just talk about this as crisis, as hopeless, we might do more damage than good. And I wondered if you could share a little more your kind of thoughts about that, Natalia.
Yeah. I think we really wrestled with the title of this panel, and especially the quotes around schools in crisis, because, we didn't want to undermine the very real struggles and conditions that are creating crisis in some of our schools, right? And also schools in crisis, and it reminds me of the failing public schools narrative that we have resisted for so long. It made me think, actually, some of you probably watch Abbott Elementary and the recent episode about legendary schooling, the charter school releasing an attack ad and portraying, these horrible public schools, right? So this failing public schools rhetoric is not new, and yet we've resisted it for so long, and now we've kind of let down our guard around that, resisting that. And so I want us to think about, and I'm hoping in this panel we can think about how we acknowledge and address the very real struggles that schools are facing without fueling this narrative, because we know that the privatizers are waiting in the wings and they're really ready to capitalize on failing public schools. And what's more, they may want our schools to fail, but they're not failing, especially if we don't use their measures, their standardized tests to measure how our schools are doing. And, throughout the last several years, some of the hardest, teaching years of my profession, and I still know that, powerful, beautiful things were happening in my classroom and in my colleagues' classrooms. And I know that that's true now too. And I think just one last thing on this, that narrative also talks about students as failing. And I think I want to be really clear that the system is failing them. They're not failing. And so, last year when learning loss and student disengagement and chronic absenteeism were the headlines, every day I saw students in New Haven and I saw students across the country coming together to organize, to support and defend each other, and to fight for more just schools and communities in a way that I've never seen in my entire teaching career. So we just know that the narrative without teachers and students at the center of it and the ones telling it is incomplete. And we're hoping that this panel can bring some of that lived experience and nuance that's been missing.
Yeah, Natalia, I so appreciate that. And just that point about centering the experiences, insights, and voices of teachers, educators, and students and staff in this process. We know there's no shortage of solutions. We know, in many ways, we know what we need: resources,
Right.
leadership, real change, et cetera. But I think your point there about stopping and making sure that we're centering and understanding that the solutions are in the classrooms now is so, so important. And that the trust in public education is so, so critical to building the kind of future we want. Natalia, should we bring on our panelists and let's do it. So you'll get to see them in a second too, and then I'll show a quick slide so we can also thank our co-sponsors. So I'll start by introducing three of our teachers that we're welcoming today. Alicia Strong. Alicia is a resident now with the CT Teacher Residency Program, which is a fairly new and innovative program that's aiming to build the pipeline to bring more Connecticut teachers into public school classrooms. She's in New Britain Public Schools. She's from New Britain, a longtime organizer and racial justice advocate with, among many groups, New Britain Racial Justice, and is really going to share with us the insights and experiences of a teacher new to the classroom. We also are really grateful to welcome Izzy Geller, and Alicia is a New Britain Public Schools alum, and Izzy is a new teacher and a New Haven Public Schools alumni. So in her first year in the classroom at Metro High School, has already authored a really moving piece about what we need to do, what we can do to get more new teachers into the classroom structurally. And finally, an enormous privilege and pleasure to welcome Dr. Erica Watson, who is a longtime science educator, a veteran teacher, anti-racist advocate. And Erica is going to be talking to us, among other things, about why educators who are deeply committed to their students and to their classrooms sometimes make the very, very difficult decision that it's time to focus their energies in other places. So Alicia, Izzy, and Erica, welcome. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
And joining those three panelists, we've got three others that we'd like to invite on the screen and introduce. Leslie Blateau is a longtime New Haven Public Schools social studies teacher and current NHFT union president, sitting in her union office as we speak, my former union president and colleague. And alongside Leslie, we've got two amazing students joining us. And I want to pause here to say how critical it is for us to have students be in this conversation with us, because we are, figuring this out together. And the only way we're going to win what we need is with students, educators, and families together. So we have Elsa Hallahan and Tenzin Udon with us today, New Haven Public Schools students, and also members of Students for Educational Justice.
Great.
Yes.
Thanks. And I'll just, thanks everyone so much for being here. I'll just take a quick chance to express gratitude to our co-sponsors, Recovery for All, an amazing statewide coalition that's organizing and bringing so many different people across the state together to ensure that we have the resources, the revenue, the tax dollars to support and fund all of these important programs, and linking together experiences in the school and in higher education and the services we need, mental health services, et cetera. And New Haven Federation of Teachers, so great and important to be collaborating with not just teachers, but the union that organizes and represents them and brings a vision of new possibilities. And always need to give an acknowledgement, a shout out to Students for Educational Justice, who we work very, very closely with, an amazing New Haven-based youth organizing group, and the Zen Education Project and Rethinking Schools, which helped us to promote this event. All right, let's jump into this now. I think Izzy and Alicia, we're going to start with you. And so you're new teachers, new to the classroom, and I hope we could start by talking about kind of what drew you, what led you, what drew you into the classroom now at this moment with so much uncertainty, maybe how that related to your own experience as students and what your hopes were for yourself and for your students. So Alicia, let's start with you, and welcome. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. Now, I think what drove me into the classroom really started ironically enough, around the time of the pandemic. So I had never intended on going into the education field when I first did my bachelor's. I was more interested in maybe being a college professor and in being an educator at that level. But after COVID hit, a lot of my research I was doing as a grad student was international. So it came to a halt. And I ended up taking a job in my hometown in the district where I grew up as a literacy interventionist. And when I went there, I realized that this was a position that I could be extremely impactful, literally building the next generation of leaders in our society. And so even though it was hard and I saw a lot of teachers leaving, I knew I was really passionate about it. And I also recognized that the quote unquote crisis for New Britain, at least a city that is very, very underfunded, has been in a crisis since I was a student there. This isn't a new thing. This is a thing that's been going on for more than 2 decades. So that really pushed me to get into positions in education so that I could be that leader and bring that change.
Great, thanks. Alicia, before we get to Alicia, could you say a little bit more than, so your first year, about what some of the challenges have been for you as a new teacher? On the one hand, you can sense your passion wanting to be in the classroom, but we know it hasn't, there's been barriers. And I wanted to, before we turn to Izzy, invite you to say a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest frustration for me is literally being asked to do the impossible in the classroom. So a school like New Britain, they're really hitting us hard with your test scores need to go up, your test scores are too low. These are the kids that we have in front of us, but when we ask for the resources, we can't afford it. When we ask for the support staff, we can't afford it. When we ask for new resources or anything that the students really need, we can't afford it. And so it's this frustration of being held to literally impossible expectations. So that was one struggle. And I think the other struggle is really the expectations on teachers are just astounding to me. The teacher is not just the teacher oftentimes in underfunded districts. They're the psychologist, they're helping serve breakfast, they're the secretary, they're doing all of these things, oftentimes not being compensated for it and actually expected to use their own money towards their class and to work unpaid hours to get the things done they need to get done. And so I was shocked that a profession of such highly educated and amazing people are required to do that much. That was really shocking for me.
Yeah, so this contradict, we need more teachers, we need more teachers, that's a solution. And then all the obstacles that are built up. Izzy, I saw you nodding your head, I'm sure as a, yeah, I'd love to share. I know you substituted last year, we're working through getting your credentials, you're in the classroom now. Tell us about both what drew you in, what excites you about it, and the challenges you've been facing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Alicia is saying about experiencing your own education and just being immersed in a school system that is not functioning as it should. I wanted to be a teacher when I graduated high school, but I also saw it as something that you explore when you're older and didn't really see it as a young person's career. I was really lucky to have an incredible mentor and teacher. Shout out to Terrence McTague at Career High School. And he encouraged me to go for it. And so I ended up subbing last year and got my certification through the alternative route to certification program here in Connecticut, which was an incredible experience. And I was really lucky to be in a school where I had mentorship from teachers and was really immersed and treated as a teacher, even as a substitute, which was beautiful and formative and is really an asset to me in my first year of teaching, but was also extremely challenging, especially as subs as well as paraprofessionals are deeply underpaid. Yeah.
And say a little bit more, Izzy, about what it's been like now for your first year and just how you've experienced it. So you were a student yourself, you had this experience as sub. What have been some of the kind of challenges that's brought with it?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest challenges is just we are short-staffed and there's not enough there's not enough teachers, there's not enough educators, there's not enough like adults in the building to like manage chaos and crisis and really everyday interactions. And so I think like students sense that they're being underserved, and like that is like internalized in ways that are really intense. And then just like we can't, like it's physically very challenging to keep students safe and to like create environments where students are learning. That being said, I think like within the doors of our classroom, like really amazing and beautiful things are happening. But it's sort of what happens outside of our classrooms and in between classes, and like all of the things that students are facing in their own personal lives that are like not adequately dealt with in ways that they could be if we had enough people and had enough resources.
Thanks for that, Ethan, Lisa. And we'll talk more, I think, about your ideas about what would a really resourced, healthy, functioning school look like. Natalia, I want to turn it to you to bring in a couple more of our panelists now.
Yes, we are going to turn it to Elsa and Leslie for the next question. And I'll start, as they're joining us on the screen, I'll start with the question. So as we mentioned in the introduction, so much of what we're hearing about schools these days is about learning loss, right? And we wanted to ask you, Elsa and Leslie, and we'll start with you, Elsa, why is that the wrong narrative, and what's missing from the idea of learning loss as sort of the defining narrative of what's happening in schools?
Sure, yes. First, thank you all for having me. Really grateful for this opportunity to share mostly my experiences in the classroom. And I think this narrative about learning loss revolves around maybe a false notion of what learning actually is, or what it could be. So I think if we understand learning as being constricted to the bounds of our classroom, then it's certainly easy to conclude that students are disengaged and disinterested in what they're learning, whether or not they have a teacher, or if they don't have a teacher and they're just missing a class, or they're not interested in what they're learning, etc. But I had the opportunity to take a class with Dan Hosang, and a question was posed throughout the class, where do you know from? And I think this is an important question because it alludes to the fact that learning is so much more than just our school, like being constricted to the frameworks of our schools. And it's certainly not just all academic. It's not revolving around books 24/7. So I've really gotten to see both of myself and my peers learning extending beyond the classroom, and learning taking the form of conversations like this, and just being in community. And that's something we observe in Students for Educational Justice, where students from around the district come and they share their experiences, and we learn from each other and how to move forward. And so I think learning that is not taking place in the classroom can and has encouraged students, and probably teachers, but I can't speak to that, to seek knowledge elsewhere. So yeah.
Yeah, such a beautiful way to start. And the idea, I think, that has always been really powerful to me as a teacher is the idea that students can learn and should learn from each other. And some of the best learning that happens outside the classroom and inside the classroom comes from students teaching and learning one another, and also teaching the adults around them too. Let's turn to you, Leslie, for this question on why learning loss is the wrong narrative and what's missing.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Elsa. Hearing you describe kind of how students can be motivated is something that teachers need to hear loud and clear. So thank you for being a reminder to us about how motivated and purposeful adolescents are. Thank you, Elsa. I think the learning loss narrative is a problematic frame for a lot of reasons. One, it's rooted in a deficit model. And Natalia, you were speaking to this in the opening remarks, that before the pandemic, we were really constantly fighting against a deficit framing of public schools, of students from urban schools, from teenagers in general, right? I'm a high school teacher. The deficit model really infiltrates into school systems and is dangerous. Add a pandemic to it, and it's even more dangerous, I think. So a deficit model is problematic. The learning loss narrative is wrong because it's connected to the overuse and abuse of high stakes tests. We know that they are a narrow measure. We know that they don't tell the full story of who our students are, what our students are capable of doing. And we know that there's a history, the history of standardized tests and high stakes tests is connected to the history of the eugenics movement in the early 20th century. So, there's a lot of problems with using the frame of high stakes testing to tell the story of what we're doing, what we're not doing. So, those are two serious issues with this learning loss narrative. So if that's not the right narrative, then what narratives should we be bringing in? What's missing, as you asked, Natalia, I think, and ask teachers, and they'll tell you, we need to prioritize child and adolescent development in our work. We need to focus on our students' strengths. And I think we really need to commit to creating human-centered spaces in our classrooms and in our schools. The learning loss narrative is going to tell us that our students are behind, that we need computers to speed us up, and that sort of we're in this competitive kind of trajectory that we have to keep up with each other and surpass some arbitrary goal. Where teachers are going to tell you the way to meet our students' needs might be to slow down. The way to meet our students' needs might be to prioritize the relationship and the development of the individual whole child in our classroom space. And if we actually prioritize child development, if we prioritize our students' strengths, the irony is the test scores would go up. But we don't even allow ourselves to do the things that we know we're supposed to do, which is focus on our students' strengths, focus on child development. And we're constantly in this gerbil wheel chasing our own tail. And that combined with the stress and trauma and loss of the pandemic is making for schools that are really alienating for the people who are showing up. And that is worrisome to me. And it's why the learning loss narrative is particularly dangerous, because it's making spaces that should be welcoming and should be nurturing. It's making these spaces more alienating than they ever should be. And we have to come out and be really proactive about making human-centered spaces that are welcoming. And why would someone want to show up if they're just told they're behind? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be prioritizing the learning, but we know how to prioritize learning. And it's not with tech tools, it's not with progress monitoring, it's not with narratives that everybody's behind, it's with human-centered choices, and we can do that.
Yes. We hope that this panel would speak to some of the realities, right? But also would center like hope and possibility, and already that is happening. And folks in the chat are really feeling your responses, Elsa and Leslie. Thank you so much. Folks in the chat, please keep it going. That's a way that we can all engage with each other, even if there's only a handful of people on spotlighted on the screen. So thank you so much, Elsa and Leslie. We'll bring you back for the second round of questions, but now we're going to turn it to Tenzin and Erica and Dan for the next question.
Great. Thanks. That was so powerful. And thanks, Leslie. You've said, Leslie, what does it mean to make teaching a dignified profession, and learning dignified for students, and that it's, resources matter, but it's not just about curriculum and assessment or finding someone. There's these spaces we're trying to produce that matter so much. So thank you for that, Leslie. So Tenzin, I want to turn now to welcome you and Erica in. Another big theme, Tenzin, and I also want to say thank you for being here, and thank you for your work at Students for Educational Justice, which every day reminds us that students are in fact deeply, deeply invested in all these questions and bring incredible solutions. So another big theme we're hearing about, Tenzin, is the teacher shortage itself. And in this very difficult moment for both teachers and students, when longtime teachers especially, decide they have to leave the classroom. And sometimes people might think it's like, oh, this is a spreadsheet question. We lost 2 algebra here, we put 2 there, and let's just get it up. It's just the pandemic, right? We got it's a supply chain thing. We got to just get a couple of people, bodies in the classroom, and we're good. Get it back to before. I want to invite you to start by talking about what it's meant, what it's been like at your school in New Haven at ESAMS, and what it's been like for you to watch teachers leave, how it's shaped students, and how students have kind of responded to that. So thanks and welcome, Tenzin.
Thank you, Daniel. So I just kind of wanted to say, like, I feel like people are not really looking at like the teacher shortage. They're looking at it as almost like just vacancies, and that there are these teachers that aren't here, that aren't sitting in place. They're looking at stats and graphs and models, but they're not really looking at like the emotional like effects that it has on the students and just like the general like morale of the student body. Because I feel like with all these teacher loss, there's so many like standing relationships that teachers have had with students, and like they've made deep connections with these teachers because like we rely on them, and we look up to them as like big figures in our lives. So I feel like it's kind of like there's this like pattern of the morale just kind of like decreasing with students. I can kind of see that they're losing hope, especially in response to the teacher shortage. And just speaking off experience for myself at ESAMS, I think we lost around like 15 teachers, which is a drastic amount. And there are teachers who've been here for like 10 years that I've like kind of grown up with, seen since 6th grade, and they're leaving. And it's just kind of sad to see, like, especially since a lot of students are hearing that teachers are leaving for better paying jobs in other school districts. And I definitely don't blame the teachers for that. And I think that has nothing, and it's a lot of like systemically, like there's no blame on the teachers, because I feel like they break their back and they go the extra mile to show their appreciation for their students, and like getting those extra resources and helping out when there's kind of like that learning disparity between students. So there's that, and students are just, I feel like, a little less motivated, because now that they're hearing that teachers are leaving for other schools and that they're getting better jobs, there's like this big emotional effect and emotional impact that I feel like isn't talked about enough with students. And I think that's one of the major things that I really wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tenzin. I think just the way you put it, that it's just not about vacancies and, filling up a roster, but there's so much more. Eric, I want to turn to you now. You're a veteran teacher who spent many, many years in the classroom. I've always learned so much when you talk about how passionate, like what a classroom means to you. I wanted to first ask you about that, right? About what Natalia said, the magic of the classroom, and what drew you and kept you as a teacher for so many years. And then, what led to what was surely a very, very difficult decision, that you wanted to continue to work as an educator, but it would no longer be in a K-12 classroom. So thank you, Eric.
Thank you for that really meaningful question. It challenged me to think about all this actually even more. So today I have family and friends and former coworkers and former students who are on the Zoom line with us right now. And that speaks volumes that all of these groups represented find pre-K to 12 public education that important. I want to acknowledge and appreciate being able to work with Tenzin in this conversation, because what she says when we first met reminded me of why I went into teaching, and it continues to remind me of why I always loved my students so much and why it made leaving so difficult. It's actually really challenging for me to talk about having left education because I miss my students. I became an educator by default. When my kids were little, I just finished my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I needed to find a job that would support my family and accommodate the kids' school schedule. So I began substituting in a kindergarten classroom of all settings. I still can't believe I started there. The principal came to me during my first day and he said, "You're built for this." And I thought, no, it just so happens to be good on this particular day. And I wanted to be a medical doctor. So I said, no, I wouldn't go into education. However, I found that through the coming years as a substitute, as a science enrichment teacher, and then ultimately a certified science teacher, that classroom management and caring for students came really easily. And sharing science was cool too. Being a teacher therefore allowed me to get home at a reasonable hour and positively impact and learn from local communities. And that's who I am at my core. I'm a social responsibility, social justice, empathy, compassion person. And so the classroom kind of made sense. I was even named a National STEM Teacher of the Year, which affirmed my ability to engage with and support and care for students. And I committed to teaching in districts with the most need. Over time, I led meetings and took and edited notes for staff meetings. I collaborated with admin, and I led and served on a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and health committees. And then during the beginning of the pandemic, things started to change.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Erica? And yeah.
Sure, I didn't know if you want me to stop there.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So during the beginning of the pandemic, I was able to utilize my master's in biology and emerging infectious diseases to inform district members about COVID-19 issues. And I continue to promote integrating equity and anti-racism and anti-bias practices into classroom lessons, into data collection tools for the district, and into overall district training. I didn't feel that there was a grab onto and hold approach to anti-racism and anti-bias practices and policies from the district overall. And this was challenging. It weighed heavy on my spirit. As I said before, this is central to who I am. I also heard more and more repeated themes and statements about equity that made me really uncomfortable, and which honestly drained my spirit at times. I heard things like, we would like to address racism in our schools, but we need so much time to do it. Or I don't think I can talk to students about saying the N-word because I'm a white teacher. They wouldn't want to listen to me, so why should I address it? I heard things like, there's a chain of command we have to follow, Erica, when you're reporting out concerns that you see. Or I would hear things like, I don't care what color the student is. If they work hard, they deserve recognition. And that wasn't to say that equity was being spread for the students. It was to say, whomever has the most access to the most resources will be the winner. And I heard things like, I don't see color, and I feel so bad for XYZ child because he has a rough home life, so I'm not going to give him any homework. And so all this started to weigh heavily on me. And I experienced personal microaggressive comments and behaviors, and it became overtaxing. And so I had to make the decision to transition out of the classroom and lab. Did you want me to go on?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I appreciate that, Eric, and we'll have a chance to invite you to say a little more. But I'm just really struck that part of what you're pointing out is it's not just a matter that, especially for teachers of color and teachers who focus on questions of race and equity, there were long standing issues that became exacerbated by this crisis. And I'm always struck by all the work you did in advance of this before you reached that very difficult decision. And really looking forward to hearing your thoughts then about what the conditions we need to put in place beyond addressing the shortage and the resources that make teachers feel affirmed and treated with dignity and wanting to bring kind of all of themselves into the classroom. Also, I just wanted to turn back, Tenzin, to you quickly to share your reactions to what kind of Erica just shared with us, and especially, your observations about seeing teachers who reach these kind of tough decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Erica, for sharing. That was very insightful. I feel like I just kind of want to emphasize like transparency, because I feel like a lot of the time, like students can kind of be blocked off to all these things and they're only hearing the negative. Like, oh, teachers are leaving because they are getting a higher pay, but they don't hear the things that Erica was talking about. And I think having that transparency is what will like lead to better connections and boost the student morale, because now they know that there's like an ulterior motive for why teachers are leaving the schools, and they're not only hearing like these negative things, which is another thing I kind of wanted to talk about was having like mental health resources for students in school. In my school, our guidance suite is like closed off for students, and you have to email to make an appointment to meet with your guidance counselor, which I feel like, especially with the teacher shortage going on, students need these teachers to need the mental health resources or just counselors or people to talk to during these times, like right after COVID, teacher shortage. Like there's so much emotion that's just kind of like flying around and that isn't like addressed. So I think that's another point I wanted to emphasize on.
Tenzin and Erica, thanks to both of you, and look forward to coming back. And I think, Tenzin, that point about it's not just inevitable, it's not just about, it's not just about pay and disparities, but work really can be done to make classrooms in the vision that you described. So Natalia, amazing comments and experiences we're learning from now. We're going to go do a second round and then really look forward to questions from everyone on the Zoom. But I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to start by saying I really appreciate that last round with Tenzin and Erica talking about how the takeaway from me is when teachers and students know each other's struggles, then we're in a better position to actually recognize that they're the same struggles and that we need to be fighting together, and that we're so much stronger together, and we're more likely to win the schools that we deserve when we fight together. So we know that schools need and deserve far more resources and investments, and especially to support students' mental health, as Tenzin has already begun to discuss. And we hear about this a lot these days, right? Mental health is really up in the news, but what would it actually look like to meaningfully invest in students' mental health and well-being in schools? And what are some of the things that teachers and students are already doing to create this culture of care? What are concrete systemic things that schools and districts should be doing to support this work? And Tenzin, you've already started if you wanted to add a little bit more, and then we'll also hear from Elsa, another student, and Izzy, a graduate of New Haven Public Schools and new teacher to the district. So Tenzin, we'll take it to you first to see if there's anything you wanted to add about that piece on guidance counselors.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit about like the questions that you had just brought up, talking on like the SEJ campaign, Students Over SROs, which I think is really important to like talk about now that we're on the topic of mental health, because their campaign and the work that they're doing right now, it's really moving, and it just like being involved in the work in the campaign is really like it feels good to like have some kind of change in the schools, and like seeing that like that change is happening is great, because they're putting mental health in front of the punitive like alternatives.
And Elsa, you're also a member of Students for Educational Justice. Did you want to jump in to share your responses?
Yes, and I think that's really insightful, Tenzin, about shifting from punitive punishment to more restorative practices in our schools. And I think this is something we're definitely trying to focus on in our campaign, and always redefining what it means to be safe in our schools, but also to feel welcomed and as you belong. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot, but if there's a true concern about learning loss, we would not turn to suspension and expulsion to solve or resolve conflict or as punishment for students, because students are missing several days in a row of school if they're suspended, or years of school if they're expelled. So we have to identify restorative measures to address our conflicts, our behavioral issues in our schools, that goes beyond this punitivity that we've kind of been overwhelmed with. And so that's what we're thinking through at SEJ, how to support each other through that. And I think something concrete that's done sort of under the radar is the peer mediation and just mentorship with one another, and students really taking on the responsibility to do this conflict resolution and be there for each other and resolve these conflicts on our own, because we do not have the support as a system to resolve these issues in like a fully fleshed out system.
Yes, yes. What a great way to kick this off, this question. I think that point about, the solution to learning loss to the extent that it exists, or disengagement, or students struggling, is not removal, right? And so it's such a, it's so self-evident when you say it, and yet somehow so many of our schools function in a different way, where if you are disengaged, the answer is to remove you, and that is the opposite of the solution. Izzy, if we could turn to you, I know that there's some great things happening in your classroom, in your colleagues' classroom, and in Metro and other schools in New Haven that you could speak to.
Absolutely. Elsa, I love what you said about just like the way that students are like naturally engaging in peer mediation. Like, I think it's so important to remember that like much of the like brilliance and the solutions like exist like interpersonally within like the relationships between students that are like, and they're not things that are institutionalized in our schools. I feel really lucky to be at Metro for many reasons, but like one of them is that like there are teachers, and there's actually a class like working to institutionalize that work. Julia Miller and Steve Stasiak, huge, enormous shout out, are teaching a class, and it's a Metro Youth Justice panel where students are trained in restorative justice, and they conduct restorative justice panels themselves. And so students who are willing to like take accountability for harm that they've been part of, mistakes they've made in the school, are then able to like engage in this process of accountability, repair, and support. And ultimately students themselves write like plans for what happens next to reintegrate that student to the school and to repair some of that harm. And it's a class that's being piloted at Metro. I think Metro has had it as like not a class before I came. And so now it's being piloted as an actual class. And it's a slow process. It's something that will take time, but it's already been amazing to see like just the growth of especially like the class of students that are doing that work. And then I also think like what Erica said really resonated with me, of like having high standards for students and like holding space and like being aware of just like that students are whole people, and students are going through things that are intense and often unknown to us or are known to us. But then also balancing that with rigor, and like students like experience trauma but still deserve like a really high quality of education, and like most often like respond really well to high standards in our classrooms. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about your classroom, Izzy, and how the work that you have students do is actually engaging and deeply connected to their lived experiences. And just if you could say a little bit more about that, because I think that's kind of central here.
Yeah, absolutely. I find like this year in my 9th grade English class, we've done a lot of work connected to music, and we've like engaged in the writing process, like as it relates to lyrics and analyzing lyrics, and like what types of songs resonate with us as a class and as a people. And that's been really exciting. And I think that like another thing that I think is marvelous about Metro and about our 9th grade English class is like we really do a lot of independent reading that allows students to kind of like explore the topics they want to explore, and like giving them that level of like autonomy. And like some kids are going really deep and reading about super intense topics and writing about super intense topics, and they have the space to do that in our classroom, and they have like the space to share their insights with one another. And I think like it's amazing to see all of the brilliance that students can share in like an environment that feels safe, that we create together.
Yes. So as you can see already, so many solutions that are, in the hands of students and teachers, and not just ideas like that are kind of far out of reach, but things that are actually happening in the classrooms, in the schools, whether students are doing it informally, these sort of peer mediation, or the Youth Justice Panel course started out with a working group of teachers coming together and, on their own time and, building it. So we are already building it, and in many pockets, beautiful, amazing, powerful things are happening, and that has been completely absent from the narrative of schools. So thank you all for lifting that up, and also hopefully inspiring folks and giving folks vision for what is possible, because it's happening. So we want to turn to our next three panelists, or bring back rather, Alicia, Erica, and Leslie, and Dan, to ask kind of our final round of questions before we open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yes, I just so moving again, and I'm just so struck like what it means to like substantively trust teachers and students, that they hold the best hopes for themselves and for their schools and their classrooms, and giving them the autonomy and respect to be able to do that. So Alicia, Erica, and Leslie, I want to just welcome you back for this last round of questions before we turn to hearing thoughts from our and questions from the audience. We've already talked about the limits in framing schools just as problems or as in perpetual crisis, and how that actually limits our ability to see all the possibilities and opportunities in our schools as they exist. So Alicia, I want to just start with you. Could you just share a little bit more about what those possibilities look like to you? What more we could be supporting, investing in, and building on to make teaching and learning dignified for everyone? And also, how do those solutions connect to longstanding conditions about racism and the inequalities they produce?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. One of the things I really want to highlight as somebody who is in the process of getting my certification, but also in the classroom, is that pipeline for teachers, especially teachers of color and folks from working class backgrounds, folks who've grown up in the school systems where they're going to work. I think that this is essential because the barriers to becoming an educator are so great. And I think it often gets lost that especially educators of color can be impactful not only on the students of color, but also on white students and all students. So bringing that perspective into the classroom, I think, is super important. I know from my standpoint, coming from a working class background, coming from New Britain, if I didn't have the Connecticut TRP program, for those who don't know, it's a fully funded program. So they pay for all of my certification courses. It's for elementary education, and they also pay for my student teaching, which is actually a year long. I'm fully paid, and I also have benefits. Had I gone the traditional route to getting my certification, I wouldn't have done it. I will be honest, I would not have done it because I would not have been able to afford to do student teaching for free. I would not have been able to afford the classes. I would not have been able to pay for Ed TPA and all of these tests. It's just so not feasible. So I definitely want to highlight that recruitment aspect in particular, being somebody who is on my way into the profession. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, giving teachers the support staff and the resources that they need to be able to teach the kids, because my students are amazing. A lot of people want to talk about what my students can't do, but there's so many things that my students can do. And we have so much talent in New Britain. And it's just a matter of giving those kids access to what they need so that they can achieve their potential. And I know this because I was that kid. I grew up in New Britain. I didn't have the same opportunities as my friends in Avon and Farmington and other schools. So I think really approaching it from the perspective of all of the things the students and teachers have to offer instead of what they're missing is a really good way to start. And then you can start seeing the possibilities and potentials going from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Alicia. I just always appreciate you're always reminding us that, right? Like so much energy, talent, vision, ideas in New Britain, and for everyone to learn from, right? New Britain has a lot to teach everyone, and the students do. And so we're grateful for that. Erica, I'll turn to you next to just invite you to say, across your long career in the classroom, and then the kind of crises that mounted in the during the pandemic, what were you thinking in terms of possibilities and opportunities to build?
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Alicia, for setting the stage for this. I just want to mention that even though I left the pre-K-12 setting, I still am, obviously, I decided to become an outside influence by training and supporting teachers and by advocating for underserved communities, and definitely by playing a role in health and education equity. And I would encourage anyone else who is in education, you can do that now, who might be considering leaving, who's already left, to consider those options as well. So I am a let's find the problem and let's fix it person. I look for problems all the time and I try to find solutions. So here are a few recommendations that come off the top of my head. First of all, districts can look to organizations like the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective for simple things like recommendations on how to teach and lesson plans and programming that might be offered for educators. Look for future teachers who attend HBCUs and see if you can promote bringing them into your community. I mean, to me, these are simple tools. I don't know if everyone is aware of them or if they feel like they can access them. I'm here to confirm that you can. Read books, go to programs, go through trainings, go through immersive experiences, listen to recommendations by other educators. Like I have a friend who's a speech and language pathologist, right? And she's recommended a program in Connecticut that is based on anti-racist teaching policies and practices. Also use the money in districts to integrate anti-racist, anti-bias, and pro-equity programming. The funds from the district should be specifically and intentionally allocated for anti-racism and anti-bias, and therefore pro-equity policies. I can't emphasize this enough. If we think about it, schools provide learning, socialization, food, emotional support, medical intervention at times, psychological evaluation, and even shelter during weather emergencies. I mean, good grief. If we can build anti-racism and anti-bias and pro-equity into every school and district building, imagine the influence that the educators and the students could have on the world at large, kind of as, I guess, ambassadors of equity. It's such an applicable concept of teach then share, which is what we teacher people do. Finally, I would always recommend having teachers lead an affect, AFFECT change, and not just create and share lessons as required by administration. Izzy mentioned the burdens that teachers bear. So let's encourage the teachers to take a front seat. Teachers attend conferences and meetings and seminars. We get together in groups to talk. Black and brown administrators come from backgrounds that offer rich life experiences and therefore a unique approach to empathy and compassion for students. So encourage those administrators to lead too, and to call on teacher leaders. Just trust the teachers to get the job done. They are humans, as Leslie said, in the zone, working minute to minute with human students. And as Alicia mentioned, Black and brown teachers are underrepresented, so get more. And research ways to call out racism in the workplace. I know in Connecticut, we tend to walk very gently, we tend to tiptoe around talking about the term racism, and folks say things like, oh, let's have an inclusive environment, and they're afraid to address the term racism. We have to start using it. Black women being consistently called abrasive or tough, the Latina child whom teachers assume speaks mostly Spanish and therefore can't work well in English, the Chinese American student who's referred to as the smart one, the new to the United States students who are disproportionately placed into SPED programming, Black and brown students who are called racist names by educators and coaches. Yes, this just happened. To the Native American student who's perceived as being from the res with lots of money and issues. These are things that we need to call out so that we can get rid of them, right? So we can make a comfortable environment of learning for both the students and the teachers and the administrators. So if we try to find and create safe and trusting groups that will help to address racism and inequity in schools, so that we don't feel as alone, I think that power will enable us to really help fix a lot of what's going on here. That's been worsened by the pandemic. However, that was already existing before the pandemic forever. I think that's it. Wait, was there one?
No, I mean, so
That's
much
it.
there to think about and to chew on. So rich. And just a couple of things that, heard, like colorblind solutions to these problems will not do it. They actually risk worsening the existing inequalities. Race and racialization, they're real. We experience them every day, and they need to be dealt with explicitly. And I also just like your point about as a teacher, educator, and advocate, that there's many roles that people are playing outside of the classroom. So, and in Connecticut, we also have a really amazing landscape of groups: Students for Educational Justice, Hearing Youth Voices in New London, CT Students for the Dream, all around, right? All, in addition to all of the kind of like educational societies, historical societies, so much interest, right? And giving teachers the opportunity to engage that and craft curricula and directions that really are meaningful to them and to their students is so important. So Erica, thank you for giving so much there to think about, and look forward to coming back to you to say more about that in the Q&A. Leslie, let's just turn to you to say both, in your capacity as a longtime teacher at Metro, now in your new role as the president of the New Haven Federation of Teachers, and also wanted to invite you to say a little bit more about the new work ahead that NHFT is doing with Recovery for All in terms of thinking about how the experiences of parents, students, and teachers and educators get linked together.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. So I think, going back to the first question when I was on, was this myth of learning loss. And I think, that's tied to the fact that we are all very much aware that there's that engagement is an issue right now. Engagement is an issue with some of our students. Engagement is an issue with some of our teachers, as Tenzin shared, the teachers are leaving. Engagement is an issue with parents. I'm a New Haven public school parent as well. My daughter's a second grader. I didn't get to go into her school building. I'm the teacher union president. I didn't get to go into her school building until second grade. Kindergarten was remote. First grade was still closed schools. So, there is an engagement issue, absolutely. And some of it is created by the systems that are so rigid that we haven't been able to rebuild pathways to welcome families and parents back in, to create those community connections. So, the laundry list of community groups that Erica named that can and should be supporting the work, and that school systems should be learning from, we need to rebuild those bridges so we can get back to that work, or maybe just start with that work and get those community groups back in. So, the model of the community school, I think, needs to be recentered, refocused, and held up so that, here we are as we're trying to heal and emerge from decades of underfunding, from pandemic, from loss. What can we do to build schools that are welcoming to students, teachers, parents, families, and community groups? And that's certainly a tall order, but it must be prioritized. And we do it by really making sure that we are engaging with all the groups that we're talking about here. And one of the things that New Haven Federation is trying to do in coalition with Recovery for All is to kind of get that coalition built again in New Haven, so that the old narrative of teacher unions are over here just looking out for teachers and sort of at odds with parents and students. We need to get rid of that narrative. It's an old, tired, nonsense narrative. Natalia said it, like, our struggles are shared. Students, teachers, and families, we have shared struggles. We have to get into this work together. And I think where Recovery for All is crucial here is Recovery for All as an economic justice organization reminds us that there is funding in the state of Connecticut to make sure that New Britain public schools, New Haven public schools, that working families in these cities get the resources that we know we deserve. And for too long, we have heard that there's not enough, that there's limited resources, that the austerity framing is out there. We know it's just not true. Recovery for All has the data to prove that it's not true. There are, at least a dozen billionaires in the state of Connecticut paying a 5% tax rate on their wealth. They're accumulating wealth at a very, very absurd rate. Meanwhile, working families are paying at least 25% tax rate. So we can no longer allow the narrative that there isn't enough to be what we accept here in Connecticut. And I think similar to that, we're unwilling to talk about racism in the way that Erica said here in Connecticut. We're also unwilling to hold the wealthy accountable for paying their fair share and to making sure that Black and brown families and working families get what they deserve. And Recovery for All has been so crucial in leading, or well, in unifying faith-based groups, unions, community groups, to be on message and to be united and say, we're not going to allow for this narrative anymore. We're really going to make sure that working families and communities have what we need. And a huge part of that is making sure that our schools have the funding that we deserve. And this, we're compensating for decades of underfunding. So when we're talking about a teacher shortage now, there was a teacher shortage before. There wasn't robust range of services. To Alicia's point, she said she didn't have the same experiences that her friends in Avon had. That was way pre-pandemic. This is something that's been the Connecticut way for as long as we can look back and see. And this is something that we can and should say no more to and resist. And I think we are going to be able to, through this coalition, to really demand that the resources that we know are here get to where they belong.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank all of you that rounded. I'm just thinking about, what you just said about the larger landscape in connection to Alicia's comments about like the just profound wisdom, insight, and energy that exists in schools in New Britain and elsewhere. And even for the wealthy, it's an opportunity to be part of building something that, that we have yet to realize. It doesn't have to be like this. It's absolutely possible to give everyone a dignified pathway into lives that make all of us better. And so I'm so grateful for that. I think we're going to get now a chance to bring our fantastic colleague Daisha Brabham in. Daisha, who's an teacher educator in the Anti-Racist Teaching and Learning Collective, teacher at Windsor High School, teaching the Black and Latinx Studies class. Daisha, you've been listening. Before we jump to the questions, I'm just curious your reactions to what you've heard so far tonight.
This has just been amazing. Especially on a Tuesday, I'm going to be honest. It's been great hearing all of your thoughts and just listening to such inspiring thoughts, and also just how much we're rejecting about this conversation that I think we've all heard for the past 2 years. So I really want to thank you all for your time and your thoughts during this panel discussion. And I think just getting to the first question that I've been really excited to pose to you all, which is from Emanate. So much, we've talked a lot tonight about the idea of learning loss and what that's looked like, and that's been the narrative. And I think, Emma is asking, I'm curious, what have students, and I'm going to kind of expand this to teachers and all of us, what have we learned from the pandemic? What kind of novel learning has been gained over the last couple of years? She talked about public health, SEL, economics. What have you all learned? And any of you can answer if anyone wants to jump in.
I'm going to jump in quickly just because I'm not in the classroom anymore, and the pandemic taught me how much. I taught seniors. I mainly taught seniors, especially when the shutdown happened in March 2020. It taught us how much students love their school, because the trauma of the shutdown and the sadness of our students when they were not allowed to go to school. Sorry, it's hitting me right now. Children were broken when they couldn't go to school, and they might say, oh, I hate school, I hate school. It was the hardest time in our lives. And it reminds us how much our students do love school, especially when it's taken from them. And right now it's being taken from them because we're not providing them with the resources that they need to love school again. But the pandemic taught me that students absolutely love school. I'm not sorry, but I'm a little sorry.
You're gonna make me cry, Leslie. I'm emotional as well. Anyone else want to add?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Who is it? I cut off. Alicia, was that you?
Yeah, you can go ahead. I'll go after.
No, go ahead, Alicia. I'll wait. Go ahead.
I was just gonna piggyback off that point. I think COVID really made us realize not only how much our students love school, but how much they need school, because it has so many of the things that we've been talking about: dental, medical, school social workers, psychologists. For a lot of students, this is their safe place. So to take that away is devastating for a lot of students. So I definitely agree the importance of schools beyond just academics really was highlighted during the pandemic.
I'll just second what Alicia and Leslie said. I saw the pain and suffering and loss. I taught online at the beginning of the pandemic and then changed schools and taught online the majority of the year. Right, the majority of the full academic pandemic year, however you say that. And so I saw some students in the high school whom I knew from middle school, and I saw these huge emotional shifts. I saw a lot of students with anxiety and depression, and it worried me because I couldn't be physically there close to them to support them in the classroom or in the hallway. And I also sometimes just couldn't be in contact at all, right? Remember, students sometimes just didn't respond by email, or they didn't join the Zoom on time. So you lost contact with them. And as a teacher who's committed to that empathy and that empathic and compassionate approach to teaching and learning, just like all of us are here, we know when we don't have that connection, we know that we're losing students, and it hurts inside. I also saw more of the health inequities out in the community with the rise of the pandemic, and folks getting sick and dying, and that was scary. So lots opened up. And then I also saw some major rays of hope for the future.
I just
Awesome.
want
Yeah.
to, sorry.
No, I was gonna call you all.
I was just gonna echo the point about connection, and I'm an only child, so the pandemic was really self-isolating, and I desperately craved like to learn alongside people and to just be able to talk about what we were doing in class, or like whisper to someone like, I don't get this, or something like that. And yes, that's certainly something I'm grateful now to be able to learn through community and with each other.
Tenzin, I don't know if you want to offer what you've learned.
Yeah, adding on to what Elsa said, like I feel like being online and all that kind of created like a some division between like students and like their teachers. And that kind of like just takes away from the real connections that you make in school. And especially when it comes to like letter of recommendations, or just like going for your teachers for like emotional support and things like that. It's so much harder when you have like a screen in front of you, and it's kind of like a barrier. So you lose that connection. But I feel like it also just generated like a lot of appreciation. And I myself am so appreciative of like all the resources that school provides for me, mental health wise, health wise, like all of the resources I have, all the opportunities that are available to me now. I think it's just so important to have that like in-person connection.
Thank you all so much. Oh, Izzy, did you want to add any thoughts?
Sure. Just quickly, I'll say like I transitioned into the teaching profession like kind of mid-pandemic, and so my first year in the classroom last year was like the first year like transitioning out of remote, and so like there's much of it that I like have not experienced, and I have like so much respect for and admiration for my colleagues who have. And I think like the pandemic, like many of you are saying, like was a time where I felt like a deep lack of community, and like entering like education, like as challenging as it is, like has been like one of the most important and special things that have happened to me. And like being able to find community in like following a time where I felt like I didn't have that, like is really special and meaningful.
Thank you all. And I just want to highlight again, this is rejecting the traditional narrative of, what was none of us brought up standards. I'm not saying that they don't matter, but no one brought up, I really miss learning about the specific standard. It was all about community and the human spaces that these schools provide. And I guess to that point about rejecting narratives, we talked a little bit about kind of the reactions or the reductive strategies that have been used by schools, whether that be suspension or expulsions. What are some of the strategies that you all might feel would be important for kind of supporting students? I guess that's a question specifically for SCJ, but also for all of you to kind of comment in. What are we looking for to help our students?
I can share. So I'm a senior at Hill House, and last year, it was actually the day we were taking the SAT, but a community member had passed away, so they held restorative circles for us, and they were very small and intimate. And I think like a coordinator at Hill House brought in like outside organizers to assist in this. And in these circles, we were really able to center each other's experiences, how we were all feeling, and how we felt that we belonged in a space, that we didn't, and just, I don't know, like create conversations to help us move forward. And I think similar and practices like this, restorative practices, are really, really important. And certainly, like I said before, shifting from punitivity to conversations and bringing people in rather than expelling them out. I don't know, Tenzin, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I feel like also kind of summed it up, having like restorative justice in place in school systems, and again, like emphasizing that transparency of the restorative justice things that are already in place, like the code of conduct that they have for that, which we recently learned in a SCJ meeting. Someone presented the whole restorative justice code of conduct, which I feel like a lot of teachers are unaware of, and a lot of administration don't have that much like experience with, or don't have the correct training for, which I feel like those things needs to be touched on, and there's so many resources out there. So yeah.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to kind of put any comments in, or? So we had another question, which I think is really interesting, and hopefully the teachers can kind of like comment in on this. And Leslie, for people who are entering into the profession, people who are in their teacher prep programs, trying to navigate EdCPA and all of those other things, what kind of advice would you have given yourself about before you got into education to avoid burnout?
I feel like I'm still figuring that out.
Same.
I mean, for me, the biggest thing that got me through like being in a teacher prep program last year, and like being like burnt out, like not having the resources that I needed, like the benefits that I needed, was like absolutely relationships with other teachers. And I think like when I talk to other like people in my like programs cohort, and even like talking to other new teachers at my school, like I think having relationships with other teachers like made everything more like it just created ease in my life. And it's like if I was struggling with something, and I could like just turn to a teacher to talk it out, or to like have maybe they have materials that I could use and be sending it to. And it's like so much of that was like relationships, either with like veteran teachers like Leslie and Natalia, and Steve and Julia, or relationships like within my cohort. Like I think that's where I learned the most, was like through being mentored and being part of like a broader school community. And I almost feel like that's like the most valuable part of teacher training, is like actually being in the space and learning from like people that have been doing this work for so long.
I would definitely agree with that. I think probably the single most impactful part of the program, the prep program I'm in right now, is that it's a cohort model, and I'm in a cohort with 19 other people of color who are training to go into this profession, who are in different districts across Connecticut. So it's like I am actually the only I believe Black teacher of color in my school, despite it being probably 90% students of color. So being able to go back to my cohort and say, girl, like, guess what this lady said to me today, you know, and being able to talk that out, because sometimes when you're isolated, you start to feel like, oh, this is normal. This is all normal. So to be able to talk to people who are also in the profession, especially if you're a person of color, other people of color, I think is so valuable in keeping your morale up and realizing that the things you're going through are real things that are validated.
Alicia, I wish I'd had you when I started teaching. I do. I wish that we could have collaborated. I needed that person with whom I could say, girl, you're not going to believe this, right? Do some code switching and people aren't saying, what are you saying? Why are you talking like that? I wish I'd had you. I did have a few folks, so I'm glad that you highlighted that. I would say, I'm a nutritionist and I work in health, so I'm always going to promote food or water in some capacity. I would say in order to prevent burnout as a teacher as well, make sure you pack a lunch and snacks and water, and make sure there's coffee available. And these sound simple, but the truth is that a lot of times we don't leave the building, or we stay long for meetings, which will be topic number 2, and we forget to eat and drink. Teachers have some of the highest urinary tract infection rates of any profession on the planet. And it's because we forget to go to the bathroom and we forget to hydrate. So eating and drinking and taking time to take a breath every once in a while are great. And then the other one is, don't sign up for every committee on the planet. Yes, you want to help decorate the hallway and you want to support students after school and you want to do the bilingual program, the LGBTQIA+ club, and all this, because you're probably phenomenal at all of it. And that's great. And we would love to have you. However, choose the 2 or the 1 that you know you can fully dedicate to, so that you don't burn out from after school stuff. Because a lot of times the after school stuff is where folks are like, oh my God, I'm so tired and I have to come back tomorrow. And that contributes to a really rapid onset of burnout. Thank you.
I want to add, and I didn't do this, get to know your union rep, get to know your union, figure out what your union is working on, read your contract, do these things that exist that are meant to help. And don't feel like you are somehow a savior. You're no savior. Children don't need saving, but don't feel like you're a savior because you're working through your prep. Stop. I needed to know that. Put up boundaries so that you can do the work. We don't need people working through their contractually protected preps. We need a system that's going to honor preps and make sure that every student gets the services they deserve while contracts are being respected. I think, unions don't be afraid of going to your union. A union isn't a dirty word. Unions can and should right now be fighting to promote the resources that are going to benefit students, teachers, school communities. So get involved in that work. When we look to the teacher union heroes throughout the country, LA, Chicago, Boston, they are really centering bargaining for the common good, which is we're not just bargaining for our pay and our salary. We are bargaining ideally for what every student should have it in their school and in their classroom. So lower class sizes, a librarian in every school. We want to make sure that students have access to housing, because if students don't have access to housing, they're not going to be as available to learn as they should be. Students need access to healthcare. And if they don't have access to high quality healthcare, they're not going to be as available to learning. So that impacts our work as teachers. So let's really break open the model of the role of unions and get involved in the union work. Check your union for to the extent to which it is working under anti-racist practices. It's going to need some help. Unions have a long history of being white spaces, problematic white spaces. So let's help unions reflect and improve and get into some anti-racist work. Because we are far from perfect, and we need to kind of be called in so that we can reflect and improve. It's crucially important. And I think unions need to be what am I trying to say? Unions need the ideas, energy, and experiences of our new younger teachers. It's crucial to our long-term survival. And I want to make sure that the high school students when I was a high school teacher, when I was telling them that they should become teachers, I want to make sure that they will have a pension, that they will have good health care, that they will be able to access the things that teachers who are retiring next year they don't take for granted, but they know they got it. We need the protections that unions provide. We need to make sure are there for a 15-year-old who lives in New Haven, who dreams about becoming a teacher. That 15-year-old absolutely deserves the protections that someone retiring next year has. And that's hard work, and we're going to need a strong group to work at it. Can I do a quick plug real quick that's somewhat related? I think it is. And thank you for letting me do it. We know that the cost of college, I mean, Alicia hinted at this when she talked about the way that she's able to do this teacher prep program is because it's funded. We know that the cost of college, it prevents more people from becoming teachers. And right now the state of Connecticut is trying to raise tuition at our Connecticut community colleges. And we know our Connecticut community colleges are crucial for our students and our students' families and as they continue their education. So there is a petition right now where we are calling on people to join us to say, no, Connecticut, do not increase tuition at our community colleges. And we're going to put it in the chat to invite folks to sign on. But I think it's absolutely relevant to this, and I wanted to get it in before we closed. So thank you, Deja, for letting me do that.
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. And I think this is like, for those of you who are on the chat, for those of you for teachers who might be in a school that lacks district-wide, department-wide, school-wide infrastructure to support you in what you're doing. I hope that you've been able to find some type of motivation tonight. And I'm sure that, people will also be in contact if you need those affirmations to know that you're worthy and that we matter. We all matter, all of us on this call. So thank you.
Right. Daisha, thanks so much for, fielding all those questions and moving us ahead. And I'm so taken by this balance of both attending to all the day-to-day and the personal and the individual things people need and deserve, and our bigger vision about structures and collective action and power. I want to just quickly say before I turn it over to Natalia for the final word, so grateful to all of our panelists for your time. This is not just a, hey, did you know conversation. Recovery for All, NHFT, the Anti-Race Teaching and Learning Collective. This is helping us chart out a vision for what lies ahead collectively for us and for many of our partners. So that campaign that Leslie described is absolutely connected to what we've been talking about tonight. I want to just also thank our co-sponsors, Recovery for All, New Haven Federation of Teachers, the Zinn Education Project, and Rethinking Schools. Natalia, I'm going to turn it over to you for the last word and to remind us about what we have ahead.
So again, thanking our panelists who, I often in my classroom used to talk about this Grace Lee Boggs quote that is, another world is necessary, another world is possible, another world is happening. And I just feel that so much from the educators and students on this Zoom who are reminding us that like the schools we want, they are possible and they're necessary and they are happening. So let's keep fighting for them to be happening everywhere and all the time and not just in pockets. I want to also thank our ASL interpreters. So like a round of applause for Shannon and Crystal who've been passing it back and forth and providing ASL interpretation. And then another follow-up. So you've seen a lot of ways to stay in touch with us. Another way is our Facebook page, and that's where we post especially events. And so we plan on having a follow-up to this conversation. So this conversation was focusing on Connecticut educators and students, and it definitely has relevance for folks across the country. But our next conversation, tentatively March 1st, will bring together educators and young people from various cities across the country to kind of just expand and deepen this conversation and keep it going. So we hope that you'll plan to attend that and follow us on Facebook so that you can see when the next event is happening. Again, thank you all so much. And look at us, the teacher timing here, 7:58, we're getting you out the door, and we did so much together in an hour and a half. So my heart feels full, and I hope yours does too, and see you again.
Yeah, great. Good night, everyone. We'll send you out with a little bit of music and reminder, it's in the chat. Our next webinar is also on January 31st, featuring a powerful new book documenting the history of the Black Panther Party. Everyone is welcome. Please sign up for that. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night. Good night.
La rumba me está llamando.